Case 1. Kemia Hassel.
On December 31, 2018, U.S. Army Sergeant Tyrone Hassel III was fatally shot in the driveway of his father's home in St. Joseph Township, Michigan. The 23-year-old soldier had returned home for the holidays, eager to spend time with his family. As he approached his vehicle, he was ambushed and shot multiple times. His wife, Kemia Hassel, was inside the home at the time and made a frantic 911 call reporting the shooting. She appeared distraught and confused, claiming she had no idea who would want to harm her husband. However, this initial appearance would soon be shattered as investigators uncovered a chilling conspiracy involving Kemia and her lover, Jeremy Cuellar. As investigators began piecing together the details of the case, they quickly discovered a hidden relationship between Kemia Hassel and Jeremy Cuellar, a fellow soldier stationed at Fort Stewart, Georgia. The two had been having an affair, and Kemia had confessed to her lover that she was unhappy in her marriage. Kemia, feeling trapped in her relationship with Tyrone, had a twisted plan to be with Cuellar by eliminating her husband. Messages between Kemia and Cuellar revealed their discussions about the murder and how they would benefit from Tyrone's life insurance policy, which was worth $400,000. What initially appeared to be a tragic domestic dispute began to look more like a cold-blooded plot for money and freedom. Kemia and Cuellar's plan became even clearer when Cuellar agreed to carry out the murder. On New Year's Eve 2018, Cuellar drove to Michigan, where he met Kemia in the parking lot before the shooting. Kemia had already informed him of Tyrone's arrival, and Cuellar lay in wait until Tyrone stepped outside. He ambushed Tyrone, shooting him multiple times, leaving the soldier to die on the cold ground. Kemia later claimed to have heard the shots from inside the house, but pretended to be unaware of what happened until the police arrived. Her call to 911, filled with false emotion, led many to believe her story. However, investigators began to suspect foul play. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a series of incriminating text messages and phone calls between Kemia and Cuellar that laid bare the conspiracy. Kemia's statements began to contradict key details of the case, raising suspicions. Authorities discovered that Kemia had been planning the murder for months, with Cuellar acting as the triggerman. She had also been scheming to collect Tyrone's life insurance payout. The plot was driven by greed, jealousy, and a desire to escape her marriage.
In January 2019, both Kemia Hassel and Jeremy Cuellar were arrested and charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Cuellar initially denied his involvement, but as the investigation continued, the evidence against him became overwhelming. Kemia, who was initially cooperating with the authorities, quickly changed her story when she realized that the evidence would likely lead to her conviction. Despite their attempts to deflect blame, the couple's betrayal was clear, and they were both charged and facing a long road to justice. In July 2019, Jeremy Cuellar took a plea deal and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, avoiding a trial. As part of the deal, prosecutors dropped 2 other charges, and Cuellar was sentenced to 65 to 90 years in prison. While the plea deal spared him from a life sentence, it ensured that he would never be free again. Kemia, on the other hand, maintained her innocence until the trial. In August 2020, Cuellar attempted to withdraw his guilty plea, claiming his attorney coerced him into accepting the deal. However, his request was denied. In 2022, Kemia Hassel was convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring that she would spend the rest of her life behind bars. Her actions, driven by greed and a desire to escape her marriage, had devastating consequences. The couple's plot not only destroyed the life of an innocent man, but also ruined their own futures. The trial served as a stark reminder of the devastating impact of betrayal, and the justice system worked to ensure that both perpetrators faced the consequences of their actions.
Case 2. Julie Schenecker. On the evening of January 27, 2011, in Tampa, Florida, Julie Schenecker appeared to be a typical military mom. A mother of 2 teenagers, she was known for being strict yet loving. However, beneath the surface, something was wrong. Her children, 16-year-old Calyx and 13-year-old Beau, had been growing increasingly distant, and Julie's mental health had been deteriorating. She had long struggled with depression and bipolar disorder, but her family had no idea how badly things had spiraled. The night of the murders, things would take a tragic and horrifying turn. This was the calm before the storm. Julie Schenecker had been dealing with deep personal struggles, particularly with her bipolar disorder. The night before the murders, she bought a .38 caliber revolver. 5 days before, Julie had sent a chilling text to her husband, Parker, who was stationed overseas. She expressed frustration over the kids' behavior, referring to them as mouthy. That morning, she told her children they were going to go for a drive. But when the kids got into the car, Julie pulled out the gun. In a cold, calculated moment, she fatally shot her 16-year-old daughter, Calyx, in the head. Julie then turned the gun on her son, Beau. The 13-year-old had no chance to escape. She shot him multiple times before calmly sitting down and sending a text to her estranged husband, Parker, telling him that their children would not be coming home. Julie's violent outburst didn't stop there. She even attempted to kill herself. She was found later that day on the back porch, covered in blood, unconscious but alive. The children's bodies were discovered soon after, their brutal deaths sending shockwaves through the community. Authorities arrived at the scene shortly after Julie was found. They quickly realized that the horrific murders weren't a random act of violence, but something far more personal. Upon questioning Julie, she admitted to killing both of her children. According to her, it was because they were disrespectful. The police, initially shocked by her lack of remorse, found a journal in which Julie had written about the difficulty of raising her children and her growing frustration. Investigators began to dig deeper, uncovering a troubling history of mental health issues that would later be a key part of the defense. Julie's defense team focused heavily on her mental health, arguing that she was suffering from bipolar disorder and depression at the time of the killings. They claimed these conditions made her incapable of understanding the consequences of her actions. Julie had a long history of mental health issues, including previous hospitalizations and erratic behavior. However, the prosecution was not convinced. They argued that the murder was premeditated, pointing out that Julie had purchased the gun days before the killings. Furthermore, her journal entries, which showed premeditated anger, suggested that she knew exactly what she was doing.
In the courtroom, Julie took the stand, but her testimony failed to sway the jury. She expressed no remorse for her actions, stating that she had no choice but to kill her children. Her confession was chilling. "I just had to do it," she said. The jury, struck by the coldness of her words and the lack of emotional expression, found Julie guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. The shocking lack of emotion she showed while describing the murders played a key role in her conviction. Julie's actions seemed calculated, not impulsive. After deliberating for less than 2 hours, the jury found Julie Schenecker guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. The defense's claim of insanity was rejected, and Julie was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. Her behavior throughout the trial and her chilling confession left many in the courtroom horrified. The case became a tragic reminder of how untreated mental illness can sometimes manifest in the most horrifying ways. For the victim's father, Parker, the verdict brought some closure, though it would never bring back his children. Case 3. Diane Zamora. In the mid-1990s, Diane Zamora and David Graham seemed like an ideal couple. Both high-achieving students from Texas, they were driven, ambitious, and seemed destined for success. Diane, a Naval Academy cadet, and David, set to attend the Air Force Academy, had big dreams. Their relationship, however, was anything but ordinary. Behind their picture-perfect facade, dark emotions brewed. Their intense, sometimes obsessive connection would soon spiral out of control, leading to an unimaginable tragedy. In late 1995, David Graham confessed something that would shatter Diane's world. He admitted to a brief romantic encounter with Adrienne Jones, a classmate from their high school days. The news hit Diane like a thunderclap, igniting a fire of jealousy and anger. For Diane, this wasn't just about a betrayal of love. It was about the failure to maintain the perfect, unblemished relationship she had envisioned. Overwhelmed by feelings of betrayal, Diane couldn't let this infidelity slide. The pressure of keeping up appearances and her emotions led her down a dark and dangerous path that would change everything. As Diane grappled with the sting of betrayal, her obsession grew. She couldn't simply let it go. She needed to take control and reclaim what she believed was rightfully hers. Together with David, they hatched a plan to confront Adrienne. But their confrontation wasn't going to be a simple argument. Diane was determined to ensure that Adrienne would never come between her and David again. This wasn't just a fight. It was going to be the moment when Diane would get her revenge. This is where the plan to silence Adrienne began. But would it be enough to satisfy Diane's hunger for retribution? On the night of December 3rd, 1995, everything was set in motion. David lured Adrienne to a secluded spot under the false pretense of meeting up. Diane, hiding in the trunk of the car, was ready to confront Adrienne. The night would take a shocking turn when Diane emerged from the trunk and began questioning Adrienne. The tension was thick. What started as a verbal altercation soon escalated into something far more sinister. A brutal act of violence unfolded under the dark skies, with Adrienne's life hanging in the balance. What was meant to be a confrontation quickly turned deadly. As the confrontation reached its peak, Diane and David's emotions spiraled out of control. In a blind rage, Diane struck Adrienne, and David fired a gun, ending Adrienne's life in cold blood. The silence of the night was broken only by the sounds of their hurried actions. After the murder, they disposed of the body and cleaned the evidence, trying to cover their tracks. What they didn't anticipate was the investigation that would follow, one that would soon unravel their carefully crafted facade. This wasn't just a crime of passion. It was the result of months of emotional manipulation, jealousy, and obsession. Days passed, and the investigation into Adrienne's disappearance intensified. At first, there were no leads, but as detectives dug deeper, the strange behavior of David and Diane began to raise suspicions. Both of them had attended prestigious military academies and were no strangers to discipline and secrecy. But their secretive behavior only invited more questions. Witnesses began to recall troubling details, and a confession from one of David's friends would eventually send investigators in the right direction. What seemed like a perfect crime slowly began to crumble under the weight of lies, with the authorities closing in on Diane and David. The breakthrough came when David's guilty conscience caught up with him. Under pressure, he confessed to his role in the murder, revealing the chilling details of how they planned and executed the crime. Shortly after, Diane was arrested as well. In separate interrogations, both she and David admitted their involvement in Adrienne's death. The chilling part of their confessions was not just the cold, calculated nature of the crime, but the lack of remorse that they displayed. Their relationship, built on obsession and control, had driven them to murder,
But this was only the beginning of the court drama that would follow. Diane Zamora's trial began in 1998, where the prosecution laid out a case of premeditated murder. The emotional toll of the trial was apparent, with many questioning the motivations behind such a brutal act. Diane was ultimately convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 40 years. David, too, faced legal consequences, though his involvement was less severe. The aftermath left behind a broken family, a destroyed community, and a lesson about the dangers of obsessive love and jealousy. Diane Zamora's story remains a stark reminder of how unchecked emotions can lead to devastating consequences.
Case 4. Rita Mays. Rita Mays, a former nursing assistant at the Louis A. Johnson VA Medical Center in West Virginia, appeared to be an ordinary woman with a quiet job. But behind her calm exterior, a dark secret lurked. Between 2017 and 2018, Mays silently killed 7 veterans under her care. It wasn't until investigators noticed an unusual pattern of deaths that the truth began to surface. What seemed like accidental deaths at first turned out to be deliberate acts of murder. Mays used insulin, a medication she had easy access to inject her victims, sealing her fate. At first, the deaths of several veterans at the Louis A. Johnson VA Medical Center seemed to be unrelated and part of the natural progression of illness. But as more patients under Rita Mays' care began to die suddenly and unexpectedly, medical staff grew suspicious. The victims, all elderly veterans, had been in relatively stable condition before their deaths, and the cause seemed to be unexplained insulin overdoses. The VA Medical Center's administration took notice, launching an investigation to understand whether these deaths were a result of negligence or something far more sinister. In 2018, after concerns about the string of suspicious deaths grew, the FBI and local authorities launched an investigation into Rita Mays. Medical records were scrutinized, and it was discovered that Mays had been the one administering the insulin injections to the victims. The breakthrough came when investigators noticed that several of the deaths occurred shortly after Mays had been on duty. Her access to insulin, a drug that can be deadly in large doses, raised alarms. With mounting evidence, investigators believed they had uncovered a cold-blooded pattern of murder. Rita Mays was arrested and questioned by authorities. During her interrogation, she confessed to the killings. Mays admitted that she had intentionally injected insulin into the veterans, despite them not needing the drug. The motives behind her actions remained unclear, but her cold demeanor during the confession shocked investigators. She expressed no remorse, revealing how she carried out the killings systematically, often using her position of trust to get close to her victims. With her confession, the case took a chilling turn, as Mays's deliberate actions unfolded piece by piece. Mays's confession shocked the public, but it also raised more questions. How had she gotten away with it for so long? Investigators soon learned that Mays had been employed at the hospital for over a year, and during that time, she had been responsible for administering medication to vulnerable patients. The 7 victims, all elderly veterans, died in quick succession. But it wasn't just the veterans' lives that were impacted. Many of their families were left in shock and disbelief. How could someone they trusted with their loved one's care commit such heinous acts? In 2020, Mays pleaded guilty to 7 counts of second-degree murder and 1 count of assault with intent to commit murder. The plea deal spared her from a potential death sentence, but still carried a life sentence in prison. During the sentencing, victims' families spoke out, expressing their grief and anger. The families of the victims were left to grapple with the unimaginable pain of losing their loved ones at the hands of someone they trusted.
Mays's guilty plea marked the end of a lengthy legal battle, but the emotional scars remained for the families. Mays's crimes had far-reaching consequences beyond her own conviction. The Louis A. Johnson VA Medical Center faced intense scrutiny, and questions were raised about the security measures in place to prevent such tragedies. Veterans' families and the public demanded changes in how medical facilities like the VA were managed. In response to the scandal, the VA implemented stricter oversight, including more thorough monitoring of staff access to medications like insulin. The case served as a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities within healthcare systems and the importance of safeguarding patients from potential abuse.
If you found this story compelling and unsettling, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more gripping true crime cases. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think there's more to these kinds of tragedies than what's initially uncovered? Join the conversation in the comments, and stay tuned for more chilling stories. Thanks for watching, and remember to stay vigilant. Until next time.